Hey, welcome back to Get Down to Business. Today we are joined by Mike Schiller, the author of The Empowering Guide, High Impact at Low Decibels, How Anxiety-Filled Introverts and Others Can Thrive in the Workplace. Mike is a former corporate executive with over 30 years of experience and a self-described anxiety-filled introvert himself. I am super excited for this conversation. This is great. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's slightly anxiety-inducing, but mostly exciting. So thanks for having me.
Okay, good. Well, your book title, High Impact at Low Decibels, is quite intriguing. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, I spent more than 30 years in corporate America, starting as an individual contributor, moving into management, and eventually into executive leadership. And I don't think I necessarily fit what we usually think of as the classic success profile for corporate America. I'm an extreme introvert, 93, 94% introvert on Myers-Briggs. And what that means is, I think most of us understand what that means, but what that means is that it's not that I'm not good at social interactions. It's just that I get my energy from being alone. As an extreme introvert, social interactions are just exhausting and somewhat stressful. And also, I'm just sort of a high anxiety person. Imposter syndrome, social anxiety, inferiority complex, fear of public speaking, discomfort with change, all those things. And none of that's a complaint. That's just part of my makeup. And I could make the argument that, maybe that made some things tougher, but none of that stuff held me back from being successful. I just had to have the self-awareness to keep them from derailing me. And in a weird way, I actually think those things helped lead to my success. And that's really what led to the book. When I was getting near retirement from my company, I started having that inner dialogue about, what do I know now that I wish I knew then that might be helpful to me to share with others? And what I landed on was this topic that may be one of the more unique or interesting things that were part of my experience, was that I had a successful career as an executive in corporate America while not really fitting into that classic success profile.
Yeah, well, Mike, this book challenges the stereotype of successful leaders being loud extroverts. Why is it important to redefine these assumptions, and how can introverts leverage their strengths in the workplace?
Yeah, it is important to redefine the assumptions, because I think a lot of us assume that all successful people are these super confident extroverts that have a natural way with people. I mean, when I think of a leader, I think of Captain Kirk, I think of Captain America, or Nick Fury, right? I mean, that's what I think of. When I think of myself, I think I'm closer to Eeyore or Neville Longbottom, right? I mean, it that doesn't fit what you think of as the classic success profile. And the problem is that can lead to us putting artificial limits on ourselves and thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to be as successful as that person because they haven't had to deal with the things that I have. But as I got later in my career and more comfortable being, I guess, transparent with people about, I don't have it all together, what I found is there are more people like me than there are people that are Captain Kirk, right? Most people have their own inner challenges and doubts or whatever. The key is to be aware of them, mitigate them to the point that they're not derailers, and then figure out how that actually ends up being a strength for you. And you asked an example with introverts. I mean, I think, and this is not an absolute statement, but introverts have a tendency, in my experience, to be more self-reflective, self-aware, and again, just very introspective. And it doesn't mean extroverts can't have those traits as well. But one of the benefits that I think introverts bring to the table because of that is a lot of times you see an openness to others' ideas, right? And so, generally not going to feel like you're the smartest person in the room and all the good ideas need to come from you, and have that strength of being somebody who's really open-minded both to feedback about themselves, but also to others' ideas and thoughts. And that leads to, if you're a leader, it leads to a stronger organization. That's just one example.
I'm chatting with Mike Schiller, who, again, is the author of The Empowering Guide, High Impact at Low Decibels. And you mentioned in our little intro, You talked about imposter syndrome, and I do want to focus on that because that is a common hurdle for introverts. How can readers and listeners identify and overcome these feelings of self-doubt?
Yeah, it's really important to understand what imposter syndrome is, right? I think most of us understand it. It's the feeling you're an imposter, and you're always worried about being discovered as a fraud, and it's not experiencing success internally that you actually are experiencing externally. And it can be unpleasant, but also have consequences leading to self-doubt, fear of making mistakes, and therefore not being willing to take chances, an unhealthy response to feedback because people give you feedback and you spiral into self-negativity, or you get defensive because you don't want to have made another mistake. And the first step is really awareness, understanding that it's your brain misbehaving and trying to trick you into believing something that's not actually true, and then learning how to mitigate it. And one of the most important mitigation techniques is it sounds trite, but the be nice to yourself. So the most common words out of my mouth tend to be, I hate myself. I'm an idiot. I'm stupid. I'm worthless. And I'm constantly playing back a playlist of my past mistakes, and it doesn't put me in the best frame of mind to succeed. So one of the most important first things to do is to change the channel and stop that flow of negative words. And when you have the negative thoughts, replace them with something. It could be inane, but just stop that flow of negative thoughts so it doesn't put you in that difficult and in a negative place.
Well, good news. We're not done in our conversation with Mike Schiller, the author of High Impact at Low Decibels, but we do need to squeeze in a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation, how anxiety-filled introverts and others can thrive in the workplace. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. We're chatting with the author of High Impact at Low Decibels, and that's Mike Schiller. Mike, really enjoying the conversation. We know many introverts struggle with social anxiety in professional settings. Do you have any practical techniques you recommend for managing social anxiety at work?
Yeah, I do. For me, that combination of being an extreme introvert and having social anxiety, which a lot of times do tend to go together, that really could be a potential derailer, right? So my wish is to kind of maximize alone time because that's how I get energy. But the reality is your success at work it's all about relationships. None of us are successful on our own. Plus, life is a lot more enjoyable when you have those strong connections. And so one of the things I had to do was figure out how do I mitigate my desire to maximize alone time and realize that it's not going to happen accidentally, right? It's not going to realize that when I have a minute alone, my natural inclination is not to go out and socialize with my coworkers or do the whole management by walking around technique. And so one of the things that I realized was I do have a strength where I'm very, very task oriented, very, very organized. If I say I'm going to do something, it is going to get done. And so I had to turn relationship building into a task. It was as simple as inventorying who are those people that are important for me to have a good relationship with to be successful in my job. And for each of them, setting up a process. It could be as simple as I'm going to have a weekly one-on-one with this person. I'm going to have a monthly one-on-one with that person. I'm going to have lunch every other month with this person. But just having a process where I know I'm investing in that relationship and building that relationship. But it's not just having time with the person. It's making sure that you use that time effectively. Again, as an extreme introvert, someone with social anxiety, I might want to get down to business as soon as a meeting starts. Let's figure out what the agenda is, get it done so I can go back to being alone. But that's also not the way you develop authentic relationships. You have to allow time for the personal connection. So again, as a process-oriented person, I'd put in my head that part of the agenda for every meeting, not in writing, but in my head, is the first few minutes are to talk about anything but work, unless you're talking to the board or it's some extremely formal meeting. But for any other meeting, you've got to take that time. And what happens, interestingly, is relationship building then actually becomes a strength of yours because you're so intentional about it. Those relationships, the fact that you're having to schedule them and make them a task, it doesn't make them phony. It's the opposite. It's you care so much about them that you are mitigating your natural tendencies to be alone, your natural tendency to be alone by getting out and spending time with folks. And it can also be not just the one-on-ones. It can also be the management by walking around. Just schedule time on your calendar where you'll do that because you know you're not going to do it naturally.
Yeah. Well, we've heard today a lot from Mike Schiller on his insights on overcoming common challenges faced by introverts, including social anxiety and imposter syndrome. And really, my big takeaway over here is how we can turn those perceived weaknesses into strengths and create a thriving career path. I know everybody here has walked away with a lot more knowledge from Mike Schiller, a former corporate executive with over 30 years of experience, a self-described anxiety-filled introvert himself. The book is High Impact at Low Decibels, How Anxiety-Filled Introverts and Others Can Thrive in the Workplace. Mike, how can we find the book and stay in touch with you?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Finding the book, the easiest place is Amazon. You'll find it in 3 formats: print, ebook, as well as an audiobook. I actually narrated the audiobook, so if you want to hear me talking in your ear for like 4 hours, that is one option for you, is to get the audiobook. And as far as staying in touch with me, I don't have a website or anything, but I can be found on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me.
I really appreciate your time. Again, Mike Schiller, thank you so much. And that's a wrap for us this week on Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I love to hear from our listeners, and I invite you to get in touch on my website, syklein.com. Or, of course, you could also find Get Down to Business on your favorite podcast app. Just make sure you subscribe, rate, review, and share. To success, let's get down to business. We'll see you next week.